Okay, this little video is going to be on succession. I love succession, it's one of my favourite topics. It's really logical and it's lovely and really easy to learn, and you just need to be able to do a little bit of thinking about it. So, what is succession? Let's have a definition. Define. So, succession is a change in species composition and communities over time. And this is something you can see while you're out and about, providing you take your nose out your phone. And you can see it everywhere. You can see it happening in your gardens. If you have a bit of land that you're not sort of cultivating actively, you'll get tree seedlings appearing there, and if you leave them long enough they'll get to be big trees, and that is succession. It's change from sort of your herbaceous garden plants and shrubs into woodland, which is lovely. You can see it on cleared land on the side of railways, where they sort of sprayed it with weed killer 2 years ago, and now it's all covered in fireweed and buddleia. It's a great shrub that just sort of grows wherever. On walls, on roofs, you can see it around college. It's just amazing. We're going to deal with two sorts of succession. So, for the sake of logicality, I promised you it was logical, we'll do primary succession first. So, in primary succession, we are starting with an environment in which nothing has grown before. So the sort of classic example is bare rock. So you're starting with bare rock. Now there are other sorts of sears, and they've got gorgeous names. This is a lithosear from the Greek for rock. There's also samosears on sand dunes, and there are hydrosears from water. So you can see, in the environment around you, ponds that have been neglected, and they're filling in and they're becoming, willow cars, and you can see that happening. So why would you have bare rock? Well, it might be because you've had a volcano, an active volcano. So all the Hawaiian Islands volcanic. What are they called? Ones with Tenerife, also volcanic. Only volcanic island is going to starts off pretty much as bare rock. You can have sort of retreat of glaciers, just sort of, there's no vegetation grows under a glacier, and as they retreat, what they're leaving behind is bare rock, so it might be a glaciation event. Whatever, you're starting with bare rock. And bare rock, when water falls on it, it just runs off and it dries up. It's got very little water holding capacity. Nevertheless, there are certain things that can inhabit bare rock, and here's my pale green. So leave a rock for long enough and eventually it will grow lichens. And these are colonisers, pioneers. They're the first things in. Now, lichens are an association of an alga and a fungus. Now, they don't just come from nowhere. It's not that if you, stick a bare rock in a cupboard for a long enough time that suddenly, miraculously, lichens will magically appear from nowhere. These reproduce by spores, so you're talking about spores coming in from elsewhere and becoming established on the bare rock. Now the thing about lichens is they don't really need any sort of, they don't need much of a foothold to start growing, and that's why you see them on walls. After a number of thousands, possibly millions of years, they have broken down enough so that on your bare rock they may have done a bit of erosion, and you might get quite sort of small cushiony mosses inhabiting those areas. So as these are sort of, you know, living, dying, they're building up a little tiny little thin layer of soil, especially in cracks. That soil will build up just enough to support mosses that don't really have true roots as such. And again, you know, you only need to look at the roof of a house to see that there are mosses, and where do they grow most? They grow on the cracks between the tiles. Again, those are going to die. It's a cheerful subject, ecology. Those are going to die, and they're going to make a sort of, you know, they're going to build up a little bit thicker soil. So our bare rock now is looking really quite eroded, and it's got this little layer of soil over the top. This little soil layer in brown. It's starting to look like a chocolate cake now. So there's my soil. And of course when it gets big enough it can support rooted plants, and grasses are quite small, so it'll start to support grasses. Now that's not to say that your lichens have completely disappeared or your moss has completely disappeared. It's still there, but perhaps in smaller numbers. So we've changed the species composition. We've now got mainly grass and a bit of moss, whereas before we just had moss. And, you know, it'll go through a stage where there's more moss than grass, and then there'll be more grass than moss. Change in species composition. As the soil, as those plants die, they build up an even thicker layer of soil. And you only need to watch Time Team to know how quickly that can happen. They're always having to dig down quite a long way to the Romans, aren't they? And you get much larger herbaceous plants growing on that soil with more roots, and so, you know, you'll get should we put something with a flower on it? Let's put something with a flower on it. There we go, there's a flower. And obviously as they die and decay and blah blah blah, off we go. Death and decay, build up more soil, build up more soil. Those will get taken over by shrubs, which tend to be a bit more woody. I'll do those in brown then. So you might have some shrubs, things like bramble, things like heather. So there's my shrub. And eventually tree seedlings will become established. And we call that tree community the Climax community. So we started off with colonisers and pioneers, and eventually we've reached a climax. It's kind of the end point of succession. It means that there will be changes, because, you know, every so often a tree will fall in the forest, whether you can hear it or not. Well, it's a bit philosophical. And it'll make a little clearing, and then you might get some, you know, the herbaceous plants might have a bit of domination there for a bit, and eventually it'll be shrubs. But you'll get sort of small disturbances, but not these really big disturbances. So we get this sort of gradual change in vegetation, and each one of these stages has characteristic communities, and each one of these is called a seral stage. So you've got the lichen stage, the mosses stage, the grasses stage, the herbaceous plant stage, the shrub stage, and finally your climax community. And you should certainly be able to interpret data. You should be able to describe that. You should be able to interpret data about perhaps soil depth, or nitrates available, or water holding capacity. But it's, you know, it's beautiful and logical, isn't it? So that's primary succession, and obviously if there's primary succession there must be secondary succession. So we still have seral stages. Primary succession, if you remember, is where there is no previous life, starting off with bare rock. So everything that's coming in has to come from outside and invade. So, you know, the moss spores, and they've not sort of spontaneously generated from the lichens. They've come in from outside. Perhaps I should have made that more clear. The grass seeds they've come in from outside. The herbaceous plants have come in from outside. So have the shrubs. So have the tree seeds. They've all come in from outside. So it pretty much depends, you know, the sort of how it progresses is fairly uniform, but what exact species of grass and herbaceous plants and shrubs and trees you get depend really on the surrounding vegetation. I found an awful lot of American ones with sorts of, you know, the climax community being hickory. In our country, in Britain, it's kind of oak and beech and ash woodlands. So, secondary succession. This is where there has been life and it's been cleared or destroyed by fire. So this is on cleared land. Cleared here deliberately by us. You know, your garden is a piece of cleared land and it will undergo succession if you let it. I periodically let mine go to forest and then cut down all the trees and think, oh, how did I let it get in such a state over 15 years? So cleared land, you might be after a forest fire. There's quite a lot, again, from American sites about forest fires. Cleared land, the key thing about that is it's had life on it before, and so it already has soil. It has soil and it has seeds. So this is a much faster process. So you might clear your land and you've got bare soil, but then really quickly you're going to get the grasses and the herbaceous plants, and when the shrubs get established they've got soil to put their roots down in, and you'll have shrub seeds and you'll have beech seedlings. This is the kind of thing you see out of train windows on bits of sort of neglected land, where they've, you know, cleared a building away. Very quickly it'll start to develop tree seedlings and shrubs. So it's a much faster process. The other one that might be relevant is what we call deflected succession. So obviously, you know, herbaceous communities, things like alpine, you know, meadows and grasslands, are habitats and ecosystems that we might want to keep. And if you leave them alone, they just go to trees. So we've also got deflected succession, which is the maintenance of environments at subclimax communities. So, you know, when myxomatosis hit Box Hill in Surrey, they realised that actually the rabbits had been keeping the grass very short and had been encouraging a plethora of wild flowers. And because of the rabbits disappearing, then shrubs got established and the whole thing was becoming a sort of forest of hawthorn and bramble. And so conservation volunteers had to go in and clear that, whereas the rabbits were keeping it all under control. But just to maintain that sort of small sward with lots and lots of wildflowers in it. So deflected succession. And there's all sorts of, you know, we deflect the succession on our garden lawns by using a lawnmower. You deflect succession by having a grazing animal on it. Can't think how else. So moorland, they burn off periodically to deflect the succession and stop the trees getting established, so that it's good for grouse shooting. And I can't think of any other examples. I'm sure there are loads. Anyway, that's succession for you.